Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast brought to you by RaceForThePrize.com Atlanta Truck Series 2025. Let's make some picks. Let's tinker with some lineups, have a little fun, and mess around here a little bit. If you want to mess around on your own, it's easy to do with the tools and spreadsheets at RaceForThePrize.com. $40 for March. I'll throw in this weekend's Atlanta race as well, or $250 for the season. It all goes to a good cause, me and my family. So, first thing, you should probably be excited because there are a lot of viable options. If we set the cut line, as we said in earlier podcasts, at 50, you got a lot of drivers and top tier equipment that can get you to 50. So these guys kind of here in yellow are all really safe options to get towards 50. Now, I know you're like, Hemrick and Enfinger. It's true. They're less likely options starting close to the front, but they still are on board. Safer options are clearly going to be the guys starting further to the back as we want to maximize place differential, stack in the back. Nonetheless, we have a lot of ways to go. And so that is really fun in DFS because there's not too much chalk. You can build a lot of different lineups. So we've got those guys in yellow. These drivers here in blue, I still believe can get above the 50 cut line, but are much more risky. Raja starting 4th, Friesen 8th, Wood, Ankrum. A little bit of value there, but not places you necessarily want to go. But if you feel the need to get completely different, then that's an option. Now, the next thing I'll say is typically we see the cut line at 50, but we could see, because we have a good selection of top tier equipment starting further back, that they could well exceed the 50, get into the 60s maybe, or at least just hog up all the fantasy points. And then that moves the cut line, at least for a value, down from 50 to 40, 45. So probably the way that we're going to have to approach this. And it's fine. We don't have to like it or not like it, but we don't need to expect as much from our cheapies as usual. Now, a super speedway like Daytona or Talladega, everybody's got a shot. I worry today that, not worry, but it's going to be much more difficult for drivers in lesser equipment to compete at Atlanta, where handling will matter, speed will matter, and so that definitely downgrades these guys a little bit. But that applies to all the cheapies, and really we're not taking, Keith McGee versus Kyle Busch. We're taking Keith McGee. And we're not even taking Keith McGee versus Andres Perez. I'm not going to take a Kevin Sawinski / AMS / Rayum / Max Siegel truck versus a Spire truck. But that's not what we're talking about. Clearly, a Spire truck's going to be faster. What we're talking about is who can score more fantasy points. And from that scenario, especially from a point per dollar point, you're going to take Keith McGee. And I know you don't like Keith McGee as a driver, but as I mentioned in the previous podcast, these Kevin Sawinski / Self / Siegel, whoever is in that cavalcade of owners now, they had really good equipment at Daytona. I don't know if really good might be an exaggeration, but if you go through and look at what Munez did, you look at what White did, you look at what Rayum did in those trucks, they're competitive, and they all scored top 20s. So I believe the trucks are fine or good enough. And if you put in that good enough asterisk and then factor it into the point that we're not really comparing the trucks, we're comparing their fantasy outcomes and their prices, then Keith McGee is definitely on board. Josh Rayum is definitely capable of scoring fantasy points. Is he capable of a top 20? Yeah. And at a point per dollar range compared to where the other value drivers lie, I think they're definitely going to be on board. And as much as I don't really like Spencer Boyd's equipment at Freedom Racing, much better with Young Motorsports, he has, in the past, excelled at super speedway racing. He knows what he is doing. We're not asking him to win like he did at Talladega once upon a time. We're just asking him to survive and move forward, maybe make a couple of the right moves on the 17 restarts that we have at the end of this race. And so he's going to be viable. Again, I do believe that at Atlanta, equipment's going to matter, but I also have to remember that this is a super speedway race, and it doesn't matter that much. And we need some value, and we're going to need to unlock that value to unlock some of these guys up the top. So let's build some lines here. Let's just start with some of the obvious picks. Hyman Smith. Not worried about starting position. Some of the teams clearly showed up, and Tricon is one of them. If you go into the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet at racefortheprize.com, you'll see, like always, Tricon showed up with more downforce, making the car or truck a little bit more racy, and thus not qualifying well. Again, if you go through one of the many tabs in the spreadsheet, you'll see that the Tricon trucks all did not qualify well. You can see it right here. Sawalich, Heim, Gray, they weren't trimmed out. Probably going to run a lot better in the draft. No worries. You may even want to stack Tricon for A, because they're probably built better for racing. B, they will hopefully work together. Chandler Smith, again, I'm not going to overreact to one poor qualifying run. Front Row Motorsports, Smith has been good, has plenty of experience now at plate races. No worries there. Starting 28th. He will be highly owned, but there are plenty of options that I don't really need to worry about that. Where do we go next? I think the safer option would be William Sawalich. Still pretty young in the truck series, but plenty of ARCA super speedway races. No worries there. So I'm getting tons of place differential. Salaries are not that bad so far. Tanner Gray is appealing, but as I've mentioned in previous pods, this guy has just terrible super speedway results. He's been around for quite a while. This could be the year where Tanner turns it around. He's getting to work with Jeff Hensley as a crew chief. Hensley worked with his brother Taylor last year, the better Gray. And Hensley has worked in the past with, I think, the likes of Grant Enfinger, plenty of the Thor Sport drivers. One of the more, not accoladed, I don't say accoladed, but one of the more honored crew chiefs in the truck series. Hensley knows what he's doing. So it could be the turnaround year for Tanner Gray, but that might not happen until we get out of the super speedways. But since we are just stacking in the back at the moment and playing around with the lineup, let's just go ahead and throw them in. Typically, you get a 50-50 rate at super speedway, so you say, well, it didn't do well last week. This is his time. Well, his super speedway rate's been much worse than that. It's about 75% bad, only 25% good. We'll go with the savings option, take Caden Honeycutt. Premier iRacer, but also a really good late model kid. Running well. Al Neese, Phil Gould, the premier Neese truck, the one that you can trust more than others. I got 7,200 left in that lineup. Good grief. I can go a lot of different directions. I won't build the complete lineup here. Do I want to go in the blue? Probably not. Don't want to go to any of these guys. Can't afford any of the top tier guys. So then that means you're going down to more risky options, leaving money on the table. But this is fun because this means people can go a lot of different directions. We don't even have a Kyle Busch lineup yet, and we're already seeing that there's a lot of options. I guess Curry then is going to be, that might be your chalk build of the day. First one right out of the gates. Think we did it. Cracked the code. Got 7,200. Stack in the back. Bailey Curry stacked the back. Had issues in qualifying with the car or truck not starting up. Plenty of experience. Not the best equipment. But Neese equipment's pretty good, although he too had issues in qualifying. You can throw him in there. You want to get a little different, then you swerve to these other drivers. I've already stated my views on the Sawinski, Max Siegel / Tim Self equipment. You can go through the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet and look and see what they did at Daytona last week. We talked about before the Daytona race that I had a feeling that the Rayum team was definitely moving forward, and it was not the 2019 Rayum team that you remember. The equipment's better. The team's been working better. They've got more money coming in. So I feel fine rostering those drivers as long as they just don't wreck. Okay, let's go a different route then. As we said, we don't necessarily love Tanner. Let's try to go the Busch route. Now, all these guys in yellow, again, what is that, yellow, orange? Should be able to get above that 50-point cut line. Place differential-wise, Busch, plenty of points there. 8's enough for me if he wins the race. We know all of these guys will likely get 2 to 3 fast lap points. Maybe he leads some laps as well. But really, projection-wise, if you can get a combination of 5 Hulk points or Dominator points from Kyle Busch, which isn't asking much, just needs to lead some and win the race, then he gets there. And he is not that expensive this week. We throw him in. We got 4,000. That's not going to work. So then we got to cut a little bit somewhere. We really like Heim, Smith, and Sawalich. I would imagine that they're going to be incredibly popular. So it means Honeycutt's going to get the cut. See if we can go a little bit cheaper. That means going back to gray. Oops. And if we go back to gray, it opens up plenty of plays. And I wonder if that's going to be something that happens often in people building lineups, that they keep going back to gray, despite the fact that if you look at the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet or listen to the previous podcast, about 75% of the races he finishes outside the top 18. That's no bueno. So that gives us 4,800. And still, we are locked out. So that doesn't work, so maybe it won't matter. You got to rethink who you downgrade. Do you get out of Kyle Busch? So probably we will do. And this is, imagine what a lot of people are going to do. All right, well, I don't need Busch. Busch can win, but he's not the best point per dollar play. So I take Rhodes. And now everybody's back on the board. 6,500. Can't get to Curry, but McGee, Rayum, Boyd are there. Again, you may not love these guys, but what we're asking is which of these 3 do not wreck? And who just finishes, I guess the way to frame it with the idea of, and you could throw Matt Mills in there too, possibly, is that they may not be better than Matt Mills, Sutton, or Tony, or Frankie, although I think they have a legitimate argument that they're right there with them, or even Fenhouse. But the argument is, point per dollar wise, who's the best play? And so that leaves us with McGee, Rayum, and Boyd. Then we're just asking who's best between McGee, Rayum, and Boyd. Rayum and Boyd have the most experience. I would argue that Rayum is probably going to have the best equipment, and McGee has the least amount of experience. So Rayum probably, although he did get the worst finish of the Rayum trucks in the Daytona race, he was still right there with all of them. And I would much prefer his experience. Now, you may make the argument like, well, McGee's going to really go for it, and Rayum, being the owner, might lay up a little bit at the end. I don't think so. But that's the 3 there. You don't love it, but it's your last pick in. It's your value. It's your punt. And the way that the slate has shaped up, that's the way we were building. It's not, there's just no other way to slice it. All right, how could we go different? Well, the difference would be just saying, all right, what if one of these 2 guys wreck? So we'll pretend that, who do we want to get out of? If we get out of Heim, it opens up a lot more options. Really tough to get away from Smith at 28th. Not as tough to get away from Sawalich, but at his price, he still is pretty appealing. So if we get out of Heim, and we take the legend, and I haven't built a Michael McDowell lineup yet, 6,000, we can still get to these cheapies that aren't great, but again, they open up the guys at the top. Let's say we get out of Bush, see if this opens up any more options, and go to Mike and McDowell. Who probably is a little bit safer. Now we get up to 6,700. Does that unlock anybody? Nope, still in the same range down there at the bottom. So if we want to get a couple more bucks, we got downgrade. We really don't want to move away from Chandler Smith, although I think there's a strong argument for getting away from Chandler Smith because the ownership is going to be incredibly high, but it should be. I don't imagine that he'll have any trouble moving to the front early and then just taking the place differential, taking the finishing position, and not even have to worry about leading laps. So where do we save a little bit? Let's get roads here. Let's get out of roads. And we can put in Honeycut. And that gets us up to 7,400. Does that really unlock anybody? We already have Tanner Gray in our lineup. We can get to some of these risky blue options. Can't quite get to Craftsman, which I think people would prefer because he's further back, but I don't think there's any reason to really elevate Craftsman by any stretch. I mean, these guys can get above 50 fantasy points, but I'd much rather not go to them. Geo, kind of pricey, especially given a very lack of experience. Very lack of experience, yeah. Nice vocabulary. But I can get back up to Curry now at 7,200. That seems like a pretty solid build. You don't have to worry about the McGee-Rayum stuff. That might be pretty popular. Yeah, I think that will be a popular lineup. Absolutely. And you can even upgrade a little bit. Right? If we take, you can actually go back to Heim. We already built that lineup, didn't we? All right, where do we want to go now? Honeycutt, we got 20s, 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 17, McDowell, 17. How about down here? Lane Riggs. Lane Riggs. Do we want to go in that? Maybe we do go Geo just to mix things up a little bit. Swap him in for somebody. Let's swap him in. Let's go a little bit really weird. See what this does. So that gives us 9,400. And we can go up to Ben Rhodes. I mean, again, Hemrick and Enfinger, this is factoring in. They lead some laps. Stay safe all day. Might be the way to get a little different because everyone's going to want to stack in the back. And Hemrick and Enfinger definitely have an opportunity to lead laps, click off a couple fast laps, stay out of trouble all day, win the race. But it's much easier to predict the top 5 than it is to predict a race winner. And we really need a race winner out of Hemrick and Enfinger, whereas with these other drivers, probably just need a top 5. The probability of a top 5, obviously, given that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slots versus 1 slot, much easier and safer to go with. This could be a leave money on the table situation where, like, all right, I got this money and I'll just take the best place differential guy. Maybe I'll take a Riggs, throw him in there. Let's build some more Kyle Busch lineups. What say you? So let's try to get Busch in with our studs. And maybe we're not completely married to Sawalich. Or actually, we're not married to Tanner Gray. And I mean, if you really want to go crazy, you could go with, let's see. No, that's not going to work. I mean, if you want to take a double punt of Rayum et al., you can do that. Then you take Keith McGee. Nah, look, and if you really want to get different, you can go outside the box. You want to take old Frankie. He did get his 11th place finish, and I like the trucks. I won't fault you for it. If enough of these cars have wrecks or just don't score fantasy points, no one is completely off the board. And again, Matt Mills is not completely off the board. They're worth considering. You know, it's Tricon now, it's David Gilliland once upon a time, or Crosley Racing once upon a time. But if you do remember back in 2019 at Daytona when it was Gilliland Crosley Racing, Natalie Decker scored herself a top 10 in Atlanta. So anything is possible. I probably would rather go that route than taking a Jake Garcia or Luke Fenhouse, who, again, I really like Luke Fenhouse, but almost no super speedway experience. Is going to try to run for Rookie of the Year this year, which is exciting. But we don't really need to get that hype train moving just yet. Maybe something we start up next week or in the next races where we get some real racing. So if you want to double punt, that's fine. I don't love it. I think if you're going to take Kyle Busch, you're going to probably have to sacrifice one of these three drivers. And the first guy I would is probably going to be William Sawalich. And if we take out old Sandwich, knowing we got to go a little cheaper, go Gray. And if we have Ray in 6,800, does that open anything up? Not really. You're still double punting. So I don't really love Gray. Puts you in the blue. Don't really want to be in the blue. So maybe you get rid of Heim. You go to Sandwich. We got Bush. We're looking at about 8,000 per driver here. And with 8,000, you can take Honeycutt. And you get 83. Can't quite get the Riggs. See if we can figure out. You can get the Geo, though. Well, let's see if we can go cheaper on Rayumes. Yeah. So if you go to McGee, now you get 88. And that opens up a couple more drivers. You can get Ben Rhodes. Don't mind that. 88, you can get Lane Riggs. Don't mind that. Gio, don't mind that. It's not a terrible lineup. Looks like Keith McGee really helps you out a tremendous amount, giving you that little bit of savings. I think that gives you a general idea of where we're looking for this Truck Series race. RaceForPrize.com is where you can get some spreadsheets and tools. Didn't show you all of everything because I want you to purchase the spreadsheet. Thanks for joining me. Triple Life's fantastic.